Hello, welcome to the Library of Congress Cine Latina interview series. This series is dedicated to sharing and documenting the work of emerging and established Latina filmmakers. My name is Carla Camacho. I am a junior fellow here at the Library of Congress working on the Cine Latina project. I'm from Brownsville, Texas, and I am a recent graduate from Yale University, where I studied ethnic studies and education studies, with a focus on the history of the US-Mexico borderlands and the history of education. I'm honored to be working on this really important project this summer alongside junior fellows Madeline Griffin and Mateo Arango and our project mentor, Danny Thurber. We are working together on this project to create what will be the first resource dedicated to Latina film in the library's history. They are off camera at the moment, but Madeline and Mateo will come in later to introduce themselves and ask a few questions. So today we're here with the great Alejandra Vasquez. Alejandra is a Mexican-American film director and producer from West Texas. She studied film at the University of California, Berkeley, and has worked for TED and NPR. She's also worked on many documentary film and series projects, predominantly on topics of immigration and activism. Her credits include being producer of the docuseries Night Shift and Eating. She was also producer of Mantangi, M.I.A, M.I.A, which won the Sundance Special Jury Award and documentary US Kids, which won the Kathleen Bryan Edwards Award for Human Rights at the Full Frame Documentary Film Festival. She was director of When It's Good, It's Good, and director with Sam Osborn of Frontera, which won the South by Southwest 2022 Jury Award for Texas Short. And her most recent project is Going Varsity in Mariachi, which is the winner of Best Editing for the Sundance 2023 US Documentary Competition. Alejandra, thank you so much for being here today. Let's get into the questions. The first set of questions will be asked by Mateo.
Hello, Alejandra. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mateo Arango. I'm a junior fellow also working on the Cine Latina project. I'm a PhD student in American Studies at UMD College Park. My research looks at material culture and cultural production as a form of documenting marginalized histories in Latin America. And I'd like to start us off by asking a few questions about your filmmaking influences and inspirations. So for my first question, when did you know you wanted to pursue filmmaking as a career?
That's a big question. I've always loved films. I've always loved filmmaking. Like, I've always been really enamored with films. They've been a safe space for me. I grew up going to the movies every Tuesday with my dad. And so when I got to college, I didn't really have a lot of technical background in filmmaking, and I thought, I still want to make movies. I still want to be involved. And so I studied screenwriting. And it wasn't until I graduated from college, I went to UC Berkeley, and moved to New York City, that I was like, oh, I love documentary. That's when I started working in documentary filmmaking, and my background is in producing, in the coming together, making films, all of the logistics that's kind of involved with making films. And so it's kind of been an interesting journey. I've always loved it, and I've always wanted to be a part of it. And I think it wasn't until I was like, oh, I can learn this and I can get the skills to be a filmmaker, that I thought, oh, I can be a filmmaker. I think I don't know. I think there are a lot of people who maybe don't see a lot of people that look like them making films. And so it wasn't until I got involved in the documentary community, and all my mentors have been women of color. And so, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. For my next question, a lot of your work focuses on immigration, activism, and the borderlands. And you yourself grew up in rural West Texas. So I was wondering, how has your lived experience informed or inspired your storytelling practices?
Yeah, I grew up in a really small town in West Texas that has a population of 4,000. Rural West Texas, oil country, Friday Night Lights, that's kind of where I grew up. And, it has totally informed my filmmaking practice. It informs my approach. It informs the subjects that I'm interested in. I think this part of the world, of the country, often gets overlooked, and people kind of think of rural spaces in a very one-sided way. And so that has, that's kind of why I wanted to make documentaries in the first place, is to show people this part of the world and these spaces, which I think get really stereotyped and caricaturized by people who don't understand these spaces and these people and this culture.
Thank you so much. Now shifting over to more technical and creative film producing and directing influences, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what filmmakers, film works, or other professional experiences that you've had have influenced the way that you produce and direct your films.
You know, I am really influenced by narrative filmmakers, even though I work in documentary. I love the works of Sean Baker and Chloe Zhao. I love Richard Linklater, Andrea Arnold, these filmmakers who typically work with real communities. They work with like non-actors, they work on location. In a lot of ways, they work like documentary filmmakers with like small crews, and it's a little more intimate storytelling, at least from what I've read, and you can just tell from the films themselves. So those are pretty big influences of mine. And they also just look at different communities like I do. They're not like these big, broad stories. They're more like intimate and vulnerable storytelling. So yeah, those are some of my influences.
Thank you so much for sharing that and giving a bit more insight into sort of that filmmaking process. Thank you. I will now pass it over to Madeline for our next set of questions.
Okay, thank you, Mateo. Hi, Alejandra. Thank you again for spending your time with us today. My name is Madeline, and while I have the honor to work on the Cine Latine project this summer during the academic year, I'm a master's student in the Latin American Studies program at the University of New Mexico. So today, I'd like to talk a bit about your filmmaking process and your experience as a Latina film director. My first question. So what is your process for directing a film? For those of us less familiar with the film industry, could you describe what day-to-day life looks like when filming?
Sure. I think what's amazing about directing films is that you have a million jobs and they change throughout the process of the film itself. For instance, right now I'm in the development process on a project, which means I'm doing a lot of research. I'm doing a lot of outreach. I'm, casting my main characters. I'm writing pitch decks. It's like all the work that happens so that I can get into production and actually start filming. So it's the pre-production phase, and that's my day-to-day right now. It's like being in an office and being on a computer and, talking to people on the phone and all of that. And then when I'm in production, it's for Going Varsity in Mariachi, which Carla mentioned. It's my first feature-length film, and it premiered at Sundance this year. But for that film, I actually moved on location. So I lived in the Valley in South Texas for 10 months. And so that process, the production process, was like me being there every day, with or without a camera, but actually like gaining trust with the subjects and just being on location, and of course filming. I think that process is like filming and then reflecting on what just happened, what we just filmed, and then going back out and filming and planning shoots and planning, whether it's like big productions or just like me and a camera person, or me and my co-director and a camera person. That's kind of what the process was like. And then there's editing, when you're actually like working with an editor and actually looking at all your footage and cutting it down. And that process for this last film was about 9 months, and then releasing. So, it's a whole life cycle. And I feel like from each step of the film's evolution, my job changes a little bit, but a lot of it is just communication and, creating the vision of the film and thinking through next steps. And yeah.
Thank you. It's always interesting to get a glimpse behind the scenes, especially coming from more independent filmmakers, which we don't really get to hear a lot about. And for my next question, you touched on this a bit with Mateo, but I'd love to hear more about it. Why do you continue to direct documentaries specifically, as opposed to other genres of film?
I love documentary filmmaking. It's so hands-on. It's, you're wearing a bunch of different hats. You're doing a bunch of different jobs. Oftentimes it's only like 2 or 3 people filming, or it could be, up to 10 people filming, but that's kind of max, at least on the sets that I've been on. It's very intimate. It's very small. And I'm learning every day. I'm being a part of communities that I never would have been a part otherwise. I'm learning from these people that I'm filming with, and I feel like they just make my life better. And I don't know, I think of myself as a lifelong student, and making documentaries, I think, is like kind of one of the best ways to continue learning and continue changing and you know, forming. I think it's just a really beautiful process. Yeah, I really love documentary filmmaking. It's one of those things that I did not have any interest in doing when I was in college. I really didn't care about documentaries. And once I got involved and started producing them, I understood how much change you can make and how much change, you know, not only in my life, which I touched on, but in the lives of the people that you're filming with. You're telling them, like, your stories matter, like these stories matter, they should be out in the world. And then hopefully, you know, when a film releases, it touches people and people are like, wow, like that, this is a real story. These are real people. And I'm resonating with this. Like, I see myself in this, you know, this is, I see myself in a film, you know. I think that's a special process. So I love documentaries. I also love narrative as well, but I think documentaries are pretty special.
Thank you for expanding on that. I mean, we've featured mostly non-documentarians in this interview series, so I think it's quite valuable to hear your perspective on this. And my final question before I pass it on to Carla, what themes do you like to explore in your work and why? What ideas or critical conversations do you want your audiences to take away from your work?
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit, but a lot of my work deals with immigration, activism. I like to tell stories about young people, about women. I like coming of age stories. I think just because it's such a transformative part of your life. And I feel like as young people, sometimes we don't really get to see, like, kind of what I was saying earlier, we don't really get to see ourselves on screen, or we don't really get to see our experiences in a way that is meaningful and valuable. So I like those themes. I like young people. They're navigating the world in such an interesting way. What else? What other themes are in my work? I mean, that's primarily what I'm working on now. My next project will be directly about immigration. It's about the green card lottery. And I wanted to tell this story because a lot of my work deals with immigration, but more as like a backdrop to the story. And now me and my co-director who did Going Varsity and Mariachi with me, we're both doing this next project together, but we really wanted to tell a story that is looking directly at immigration, but more looking at immigration of people who move here and who live here throughout their first year in the country, and without like the politics of, you know, will they cross or not, or, you know, like, are they undocumented? I think those movies have been made like over and over again, and we look at those immigration stories. They're very important, and I'm really glad that they're being made, but I wanted to look at, after those questions are settled, like, what are the resources that this country has for immigrants? You know, what are their lives like when they live here? What are the challenges that they face? What are the beauties that they live through while they're here? And so that's my next project, and that's touching really, really directly on the immigration system and immigration policy, but more through hopefully like a coming of age, like a human experience kind of lens. Yeah, because I think like a lot of the stories that we get about Latinos, a lot of the stories we get about Mexican Americans, about immigrants, they tend to like villainize us, or they tend to be traumatic. And I think that there's like a lot of joy and beauty in our lives and in our stories, and I hope to reflect that in my storytelling.
Okay, thank you for sharing your experiences with us. I think your insights are particularly important to those future filmmakers who may come across this interview series and may have an interest in pursuing documentary film and want to learn more. So thank you. And for now, I will pass it over to Carla, who will ask you a bit about diversity and representation.
Hello again, I'm back. So like Madeline said, I have a few questions to wrap up this wonderful conversation, and these are about the theme of representation, particularly focusing on your most recent film, Going Varsity and Mariachi. So first, for our audience who may not have seen the film or heard about it, could you tell us a bit about the film?
Sure. So Going Varsity in Mariachi is a feature-length documentary It follows a year in the life of a competitive mariachi team in South Texas along the border. So it's like a sports competition kind of film, but it's also a coming of age story about growing up in South Texas along the border. Yeah.
Thank you. And what did you hope to achieve in making a documentary about mariachi, about the Rio Grande Valley, about the borderlands, and sort of the intersection of all of those things?
I think when people think of mariachi, they tend to think of the musicians who play al talón, who go from restaurant to restaurant, you know, from table to table, playing songs for people. And they think of mariachi as very like a caricature. They think of like, you know, sombreros and mustaches and all this stuff. And I wanted to show that mariachi is way deeper than that. It's cultural, it's important to us. I wanted to show that through spending time with these students who are dedicating their time and their lives to mariachi music, you can see the respect, the admiration, the transformative experience that this music gives to them. That it's way more than, you know, a caricature of like these guys playing music. It's very cultural and important to us as Mexicans, as Latinos, you know, like it's way bigger than just what they might think it is. So that was kind of what I wanted to do with this film. I wanted to make mariachi cool because it is.
Mariachi is very cool. As a mariachi player, very cool. How do you approach diversity and representation in your films, both on screen and behind the scenes?
On screen, you know, I think that's just part of who I am, the subjects that I'm interested in, the people that I'm interested in, the collaborators that I end up working with, my participants in my documentaries. I mean, I try to just be really open in the process of who I'm going to follow. For instance, in going Varsity and Mariachi, we wanted to follow a bunch of different members on the team. It's a 20-person team. You know, we couldn't follow all 20 of them, but we were really thinking about, okay, like, here's the leader of the team. Here's someone who loves this music and actually wants to study it in college. Here's a couple on the team, and they happen to be a queer couple. I don't think you really see that a lot, you know, queer mariachi musicians. So these were kind of the things that I was thinking about when we were highlighting some of the members on the team. And then behind the camera, I think it's so important for me, I mean, I want to work with you know, Latinos, just because it's like, it just makes the whole process better. Like we speak the same language, you know, literally, and we just like get each other on a different level. So it's important for me to kind of bring on people who represent the people who are going to be on screen, because I think that's important too. But also, you know, just for me, I want to bring up and uplift different filmmakers. And so for Going Varsity and Mariachi, our camera person, Michael Cromet, is a Cuban filmmaker, Cuban Puerto Rican filmmaker. Our sound recorder is Charlie Vela. He is like from the Valley. He's amazing. Even our editor, Daniela Quiros, she's a queer Latina filmmaker and editor. And, you know, I thought that was really important because they get the story and they understand it in a way that would be hard to explain to other people. So yeah, all of that is so important to me.
Thank you. And I mean, that's really important work behind the camera, you know, in front of the camera. So thank you so much for doing that work. My final question is, what tips would you give aspiring Latina filmmakers who may be interested in sharing similar cultural histories and stories, and particularly in documentaries?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many, so many tips, so much advice. For sure, find your mentors, find people who you look up to and just reach out to them and see if you can work with them, see if you can shadow them. I think, you know, part of this work is, as a filmmaker for me, is this idea of mentorship. And so other filmmakers, I'm sure, are the same and want to uplift young filmmakers and work with young filmmakers. So find your mentors, they will be your allies. Learn a bunch of different jobs. In documentary especially, learn to produce, learn to edit, learn to shoot. These are things that will make you a more well-rounded filmmaker. They will make you a better director because you'll understand how to speak to these people after you know a little bit about these jobs. So just try to learn as much as possible. And, you know, rejection is part of the process. I guess that's just like the truth of being a filmmaker is you will apply to a million grants and funding and all this. And, you know, as long as you believe in your idea, you just need that one yes. So just, you know, keep pushing, because for going Varsity and Mariachi, we got a lot of rejection, a ton of rejection in the funding process. And, you know, you just got to take it with stride, because the right person is going to see your project and say, yes, let's make this. And that's all you need. So yeah, those are my tips.
Thank you. And I'm sure people who watch this interview will find these very helpful. So thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of our time together, unfortunately. So Alejandra, I just want to thank you so much for joining Madeline, Mateo, and I to chat about your work and the impact that you're making on the industry. Today, we learned a lot, not only about your recent film, but also into your process and evolution as a storyteller. So thank you so much for spending this time with us today. And we look forward to seeing more of your work in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much.